Alright, welcome to our review for Unit 2. This is on migration. Um, Keep in mind, migration is a permanent move from one location to another, not visiting for the summer, not visiting for the weekend, but a permanent relocation of you and your family or just yourself. This can also be known as relocation diffusion. If you take any idea with you or any kind of characteristic, you spread that idea when you go somewhere new. The two kinds of migration are emigration and immigration. Anybody who migrates is an immigrant and an immigrant. Okay, they are always considered both of these. So emigration is where you're emigrating from. The way I remember it again is with the E exiting. I emigrated from a country means I'm leaving a country. That's where I'm departing from. And immigrant means the country you are arriving to or the country you are going into. So emigrating where you're leaving, immigrating again is kind of where you are heading to. Keep in mind when a place has more people coming in than out, it's going to be a net in migration. Notice the more developed parts of the world are going to have a net in and then a net out migration. It's going to be more of those stage two or undeveloped or less developed countries in the world. People are usually leaving out and having a net out to go search for jobs elsewhere. Now, there are two types of overall migration that you can kind of break down these categories for. The first is going to be international. When you migrate internationally from one country to another, there are two ways you do it: voluntary migration or forced migration. So, voluntary migration is you're choosing to move. Usually, you choose to move because of economic reasons. So, just because you don't there's not a lot of money there, there's not a lot of jobs there, you're not really being forced out of that country, okay? You are choosing to leave that country to go search for better economic prosperity elsewhere. Forced migration usually has to do with environment, politics, religious conflicts, war, etc. International patterns that you do want to understand that are current today. Keep in mind Asia to Europe, Asia to North America, mainly United States and Canada, and then finally Latin America as a whole to North America, which would be United States and Canada. Those are the big patterns you see today. The other type of migration in general, so you either have international, where you're crossing from one country to another, to internal, where you're just moving somewhere within the country. You're just moving somewhere in the country. Now, we can break down moving somewhere into a country into two different types. Interregional, where you actually go from one region to another, or intra-regional is where you're going to stay more kind of within a really kind of big city. Are you moving into the big city from the country? Are you leaving the really big downtown area to the suburbs? That's going to be intra-regional, where you're staying within one region. Okay, and then interregional is where you're going to go from the northeast to now you want to get a job out west in Los Angeles. That's going to be internal migration. Right, but then it's going to be broken down even more where you have interregional going from one region to another. And think about Brazil, think about Canada and China, where you had a lot of internal or interregional migration in those countries as well. So Ravenstein's laws of migration, these were created over 100 years ago. And these were just basically patterns he saw. Again, number one, most migrants cover short distance. They prefer to go to the country that's really close. So about 100 people might go to the close country. And then 50 might only go to the country 2 countries away. And then finally, you only have 10 people go to the country that is on the other side of the continent. Number two, if you really do travel far distances or international migration, you're usually going to settle in an urban area. So if you were to migrate to France, good spot for you to be would probably be Paris. If you're migrate to Mexico, Mexico City would be probably a high level guess that that's where you're going to actually move. A lot of people move in steps where it's not really just going to be one migration from here to there. You're going to take small steps to get to eventually where you want to go. Most of people are moving from rural to urban. That still holds true today. Start of migration flow produces movement in the opposite direction. So when you have people going from this side to this country, eventually you're going to have people going back from this country to the original country as well. Most people who do migrate are adults or kind of older teenage years, above 15, into the 20s, into the 30s. Not really a lot of babies. If it's international, that's usually young males. That was Ravenstein's law. Right now, it's going to be more of a 50-50 split. So more women are now migrating internationally than men. It's more of a 50-50 split. But back during Ravenstein's time, if you were to travel across the world internationally, usually it's going to be the young male who's going to go. Now, keep in mind with this, if you are a husband of like or a husband, you have a wife, you're in your 30s, and you have a couple kids, you're probably not going to migrate. If you have a young son who's about 15 or 16, and he's not really the breadwinner of the family, he might migrate. Keep in mind, you still need to have somebody back at the original country to kind of still make ends meet. Um, Other concepts, the idea of place utility. This is kind of a factor that plays into whether you're satisfied with your home country, dissatisfied with your home country, or where you're going to head to. Distance decay. The idea is you're going to migrate to a place that's closer. You're going to have more of your people or more of your society live or migrate to a place that's closer. If they're a little bit further away, you're going to have less people, and then if they're really far away, you're going to have a lot less people the further away you go. Remember, distance decay is not just close versus far, it's that you're going to see the decay effect. Basically, less and less the further you get away. Less and less the further you get away. Two other big concepts we do have is intervening opportunity and intervening obstacle. Intervening opportunity is the reason why you're not going to migrate further is that there's an opportunity that is just as good as a further opportunity, but it's a little bit closer. So that's an intervening opportunity. Hey, I was going to migrate across the country, but I found a job that would pay me the same economic opportunity in Madison. That's going to be an intervening opportunity. It's going to prevent me from migrating across the country because there's an opportunity much closer, which means that Los Angeles job for me is going to be less attractive. Now, intervening obstacle. Through most of the time, intervening obstacles were physical features on the Earth's surface, rivers, oceans, mountain ranges. Today, a lot of intervening obstacles are going to be quotas or any kind of political barriers in a country. If a country is not very welcoming to migrants, that could be an intervening obstacle. If you're not allowed to leave your country because there's a war, that could also be an intervening obstacle as well. Now we're going to move on to kind of the basics, the push and pull factor. Alright, so with push and pull factors, the key thing for push factors is why you are leaving your country or why you are leaving where you're leaving from. Pull factors is for the destination, okay? The destination. Where are you going and why are you going there? I get that things might not be good in your homeland, there's war breaking out, but why are you going to place A over place B? Why is B more attractive than C? And that's going to be the pull factor. Why are you choosing? You can go anywhere in the world. Why are you choosing that destination? Now, some of the big ones in the world today, political factors. This is going to be ethnicity, race, religion, political unfavorability in the country where you might have a dictator, etc. Think about a lot of ISIS refugees or people that are Syrian refugees who are leaving because of ISIS. That would be a push factor. A lot of people are now leaving Myanmar/Burma these days. That's going to be a push factor because if they stay, they're going to be persecuted. They don't want to be persecuted for their beliefs, so therefore they are kind of basically being forced/pushed out of their country. Now, if you are pushed out of your country for a political reason, you could also even say an environmental reason of like a disaster, you could be a refugee. You're being forced to move to another country because if you stay in the country that you're at, you're going to be persecuted. An internally displaced person is somebody that is just like a refugee, except they are still in the country of where they would be persecuted. So they may have left their major hometown, they just have not found a way to actually leave the actual country. A refugee is somebody that's trying to seek refuge in a different country. They're trying to seek refuge in a different country. They're there for the same reasons as an internally displaced person is stuck in their country, but they are just in a different country. Now, the pull factors. Why are you going to country A over country B for political reasons? Well, this country is more appreciative of my religion, or there's more religious freedom there, or there's more political freedom in country B, so therefore I'm going to go there. And another kind of pull factor is simply could be location. If you are a refugee and you're leaving your country, you might not really look at all this other stuff. You might just say, hey, I'm going to go to the closest country. That could be the pull factor, is location, because you are what a lot of people are referring to as an asylum seeker. You've migrated to another country, but you want to be seen as a refugee. Now you've come into their country. Not every country has to recognize you as a refugee. They might not think what you are leaving for is legitimate. So an asylum seeker is somebody that wants to be seen as a refugee. Because if I were to see you as a refugee, I would grant you access into my country as protection. If you just come wander over, I have no idea if you're an undocumented migrant, refugee, but you're an asylum seeker. You're there for refugee reasons. And you're seeking asylum, you're seeking kind of not forgiveness, but for the ability to be in that country, so you don't have to go back to where you came from and kind of face that persecution. Now, another one is going to be a big one is environmental factors. The two terms we had on here is a floodplain. Just remember that's a floodplain is an area that floods pretty frequently, depending on your floodplain number. Obviously, if you are here, you're going to be in a floodplain of probably like 5 or 6. If you're in a 30, 40, 50, 60-year floodplain, you're going to probably be living a little bit further away. And desertification is the loss of agricultural land to the desert. So you kind of have that medium agricultural land, which some people think is pretty good to use for agriculture. But if you farm it to death and it's right next to the Sahara Desert or any other desert, that desert's going to expand because all you're going to do is dry out the desert. So essentially, desertification is the loss of that kind of medium range farmland. Now, these factors, along with famine, which is basically shortage of food, drought, loss of land to a variety of reasons, any kind of natural disaster, that's going to be an environmental push factor. This is why you're going to leave your country. Now, a pull factor, usually you're not pushed out of a country and you don't look for a country that has really good environmental stability. All right, you're leaving this country and you're going to head elsewhere. You're just going to try to get out. Now, if you do want to leave a decent place, and there's going to be a couple pull factors. Usually people for environmental reasons migrate because of warm weather, better views, seaside, oceans, mountains, or more stable climate. People are going to kind of migrate out of a really cold Alaska type environment and be pulled to more of a stable climate of like Wisconsin, Kentucky, Tennessee, Illinois. Now, our final one is the most common one that people migrate in the world. Most people migrate for economic factors. Push factor, you don't have jobs, you have low paying jobs, the entire economy of the country you're in or society is pretty bad. The pull factors, you're going to go to country A because they have more jobs over country B. They have higher paying jobs over country B. And country A has a little bit more stable economy. Keep in mind, during 2008, 2009, we had a decrease in the amount of migrants, both documented and undocumented, to the United States, mainly because we had an economic downturn. All right, they saw the economy was a little unstable, so therefore, why migrate to the United States? They may have migrated elsewhere or nowhere at all because it was more of a worldwide recession. So keep in mind today, we have a lot of migrants from Latin America and Asia to the United States who have migrated mainly for economic reasons. 150 years ago, most people came from Europe for economic reasons. Alright, so U.S. immigration patterns. Keep in mind we have 3 major waves, and then the second wave is broken down into a little bit. First wave, you have a lot of... Alright, so with this first wave, you have Jamestown and Plymouth kind of Rock. These are people that are coming for more... not political reasons, but basically for religious freedom in the United States and also to set up a permanent residency here in the United States, whereas Jamestown. This was all voluntary. Now, a forcible one during the first wave is going to be the African slaves who came during the Triangle Trade. Now, keep in mind, we had 2 groups of people, Europeans that came voluntarily, and then you had Africans who came to the United States forcefully during this wave. Now, the second wave, it gets a little bit trickier. Up until about the 1840s, most people that migrated to the United States were from the UK, British, or Britain, England, whatever you want to call it. Then right around the 1840s, because there was a lack of money, there's famine, you had a lot of Irish start moving to the United States. Again, this was more for economic prosperity, to have their own farms, to have their own life in the United States. Now, the generalization that I have asked you guys to kind of remember is the north and west of Europe should always be lumped together, and the south and east should always be lumped together. So now, during the first couple waves, during the mass European migration, you're going to have a lot of Irish, which is going to be in the north, and a lot of Germans, which is also going to be in the north and western part of Europe. Keep in mind we have a big gap here, and the reason we have a big gap is because of the 1860s, where we had the Civil War in the United States. Right around the 1880s, we now start having Scandinavia people, Norway, Swedish, people, northern part of Europe. And then finally, at the turn of the century in the 1900s, which would be the 20th century, we now start having a lot of Italians, Russians, Austrians, people that are from the south and eastern part of Europe now wanting to migrate to the United States. The key thing to remember is the people that were here first in the 1800s, early 1800s, mid 1800s, and late 1800s were seen as more of the better migrants, and they had kind of a negative stereotype of people that were coming in later, the southern and eastern part of Europe. Now, this was mainly because when these people start migrating in, they're now competing for the jobs that the northern and western migrants originally had in the United States. Since they're competing, they're new migrants, they're going to work for a little bit cheaper. Thus, you're going to have more negative attitudes from the north and the west migrants in the United States compared to the southern and the eastern migrants of Europe as well. The third wave of the United States, and this is more from the 60s, 70s until today, you have a lot of people migrating from Asia and Latin America to the United States. Asia is going to be a little bit more because of the brain drain. Latin America is more of direct economic opportunity. They are being kind of more pushed out of their country for lack of economic opportunity to go to a country that simply does have the bare minimum economic opportunity for them. Okay, so now we're going to look at interregional migration of the United States and slash kind of the center of population in the United States. Now remember, interregional migration is pattern of moving from one region of the United States to another region of the United States, and we can usually see this with the centroid or the gravity, center population gravity, all the different names that I told you guys in class that this is kind of called. A few of the things to kind of keep in to remember if you ever see one of these kind of on a test is usually if you have a short amount, it means you didn't have a lot of people moving really far, or they stayed really kind of close, or you didn't have a lot of people moving at all. If you do see a big jump like this could either be explained geographically, where you had a lot of people move further away, okay, or you just had a lot of people move in that direction, no matter how far away it is, more people in that direction. End of story, kind of for that. Now the first one, hugging the coast. Keep in mind, at the original time of the United States and our original kind of center of population, we only had the eastern part of the United States. Okay, we did not have the rest of the United States at this point. We stayed near the coast for the main reason of that's where a lot of ships and ports were. Our biggest economic trader at the time was Great Britain, so therefore we had to keep all those ports and everyone kind of near there. In addition, we had a barrier, which was the Appalachian Mountains at the time. It was very hard to venture over them, mainly for costs and supplies and lack of technology at the time. Now notice that now we are able to get across the Appalachian Mountains. This is going to be a little more of the migrants who are coming during this time. Better transportation, better technology allows us to kind of now migrate from the eastern region of the United States to more of the Midwest of sorts of the United States here in Ohio and Kentucky with the huge amount of trees in this area. This allows a lot of people to migrate because they can be more sustainable on their own. Build homes with the trees, barns, fences. As long as they have land of their own, they can be pretty much sustainable. Now we're going to see this huge jump here. We have a huge kind of long jump here, and that's because we skip over most of the United States, and with the expansion of the West, now we have more territory to the United States. Now we need to populate that Western territory. We need to open it up. And one of the ways we do that is with the gold rush. With the discovery of gold in California in the 1840s, 1850s, we have a lot of people now moving out west in search of kind of that gold. Now, a lot of people moved out there not for the gold, but to kind of open up businesses to support the people that went to go look for gold, restaurants, hotels, supply stores, etc. Those are the people that made a lot of money out there. So the key thing about the gold rush is not the gold, it's that it helps settle the population or the western region of the United States, thus shifting the center of population really kind of far west, almost to where Indiana is today. So after the gold rush, people now realize that the Great Plains has a lot of good farmland. So now we are moving back from the west to the more midwestern part of the United States. Thus, you have a huge short kind of extension of the centroid, mainly for the reasons of people are now filling in the Great Plains because of technology has now allowed them to farm much faster, better. They can dig up some of that land they didn't think was really kind of good for agriculture years ago. So now we start having more people, more farmers move to the Midwest part of the United States or the Great Plains. In addition, with the railroad during this time, you now can kind of send your crops off to the bigger cities so you don't have to live near the really big cities on the East Coast or the West Coast. You can live in the middle of the United States with not a lot of major cities, and the railroads and stuff like that will help transport a lot of your items to the major cities where you're going to sell a lot of your stuff to your customers. And notice the final trend here for interregional migration of the United States is that people are still moving west, but now you start seeing a directional shift to the south. This is more of people moving from the Frost Belt, the northern part of the United States, to the southern part of the United States, Southern California, Texas, Arizona, Florida, and a lot of people are now moving south. The reason they are now shifting to the west and the south, to the Sun Belt, one is because of weather, and two, because of factories now shifting from the northern part of the United States to the southern part of the United States, because that's where a lot of the cheaper labor would be during this time. Alright, so now we're going to look at a few key internal migrations or interregional migrations around the world. The first one again is Russia. Russia wanted to move people more towards the north in the eastern part of their country. That's where all their big supplies were, the raw materials. And they wanted people to kind of move over there so they can kind of fill those jobs. They would prefer the factories to be near the raw materials so they wouldn't have to ship it that long distance. The main thing about it is that it was too cold. At first, they started forcing a lot of people to kind of Siberia, away from the center of population. This was not very popular. Okay, forcing people to kind of move there was too cold. Then they started allowing people to kind of voluntarily move there. Again, that didn't really work as well. But that was one government policy put into place during the Soviet rule at the time to get people to move to the northern part of Russia to kind of disperse the population a little bit so they could be closer to the raw materials for the factories. Another one, which is not a kind of government movement, but more of just where the jobs are. You have a lot of those natural resources, again, natural gas, oil sands, mining in Western Canada. Because you have a lot of this kind of in Western Canada, people are now migrating from the east, remember the northeast part of the United States, and Canada here is going to be heavily populated or densely populated. And now people have been starting to move out of this area into the western part of Canada to go for these pretty decent paying jobs. However, it's now shifting the population center of Canada more towards the west. In addition to this, it is now shifting the political power of Canada because you have more political power, more political votes in this part of Canada. Representatives, political figures now have to take in the needs of people in the western or, quote, the forgotten part of Canada kind of for years. Now they have a little bit more power, a little bit more political clout when it comes to politics of Canada. Another country that had a kind of national policy or governmental policy is where they started letting people to kind of move or relax the restrictions on people moving in China. Before, they would not really let people migrate interregionally in China, but now since they took those restrictions off, a lot of China has been moving from the rural part of the country, the farming part, into the more industrialized cities in the country in search of kind of those economic factory jobs in China. So if you look interregionally in China, you're going to have a lot of people leave the heartland, the agriculture land, into the more bigger cities on the coastal part or the eastern part of China. And the final one is Brazil. This one's a little bit more unique one, where they have the idea of a forward capital. Now, the idea of a forward capital is for an economic reason or to disperse the population, and they wanted to disperse the population and build this kind of like pre-planned capital of Brasilia. So they moved the capital away from the coast into kind of this pre-planned city, more towards the Amazon to kind of get more people heading away from the coast because they want to start using all the resources in the center of the country. So this was strategically planned to be more in the center of the country, thus why they also named it Brasilia, as an ode to kind of everybody in the country. part of the problem of building a city kind of right there where you know a lot of people are going to migrate to is the idea of squatter settlements. Because a lot of people are now going to Brasilia at an extremely fast rate, not a lot of people can afford the housing there. So you have the idea of squatter settlements or people starting to live on the outside of the city, mainly because they can't afford the housing. If you know people are going to move there, a lot of the rent and stuff like that is not going to be affordable. People are going to jack up the prices because they know they can get that high demand price for all the people that have to move to Brasilia for the government jobs. Now, in addition, not everybody works for the government in Brasilia. People work for the restaurants, the hotels, all these places people need to eat and visit during their stay there. The workers there obviously still need somewhere to live, so they start living in these squatter settlements, which is kind of these not rundown but shacks and makeshift apartments kind of in the outside of town, simply because they cannot afford the housing in the downtown area. Now, intra-regional migrations, our chapter kind of mainly focused on these three aspects. Rural to urban. This is the fastest growing intra-regional trend in the entire world. All right, rural to urban. People are leaving the countryside and moving to the close nearby city for industrialized factory jobs. Now, this was big in the United States and in Europe in the 1800s, but today the rest of the world, think of these stage 2 countries finally catching up. Now, these people are now leaving the countryside. They're losing their kind of farm jobs. They're getting a little bit better at farming. They don't need as many jobs. And they're heading to the cities, to these new kind of factory jobs, which are available all around the world in these kind of major cities. So rural farming is declining, and now they are being pulled to cities because that's the only jobs that are available to them. Now, the biggest trend in the United States is from urban to suburban. So people have already moved to the downtown area not hundreds of years ago, decades ago. And now the current trend is now people are leaving the downtown areas and they're slowly starting to go to the suburbs. Notice you have 23% of the population in suburbs in 1950, and by 2000 you have 57% of people now living in the suburbs. So the biggest one in the United States for intra-regional, you're staying in the region. All right, this is more around a bigger city. People are leaving the downtown areas, the big urban Milwaukee type areas, for the suburbs like Waukesha, Brookfield, Greenfield, Mequon, etc. The reason why people are leaving the downtown areas is pretty important, is because they want to kind of have, quote, a better lifestyle. This is for economic reasons. These are people trying to look for a new job. This one, they probably still have the same job, but they want a better house. They want a bigger house. They want to have a private backyard. They think parking's a little bit easier to find out in the suburbs. They have the idea that the suburbs have the better schools, more funding goes to those schools. So these are all pull factors to the suburb. The downside of the suburbs, you do lose a lot of farmland. Every time Waukesha grows, every time Brookfield grows, we do take a little bit more farmland away, that arable land away from kind of the surrounding communities. Now, the newest trend is from urban to rural. And when I say urban on this, it could be suburban or it could be urban downtown. But the idea is people are kind of skipping the suburbs and they want to go way to the countryside. They want to go back to the rural areas. Now, the rural areas they want to go to is not more farmland. It's more picturesque, more scenic. This is called counter-urbanization. So this is going to be suburbanization. This is urbanization. And counter-urbanization is also going to be a lifestyle switch. People want the more relaxed kind of views of life. They want the easy lifestyle. With more technology, this allows people to kind of move around for their jobs. They don't have to go into a building every single day to the work. They can just open up their laptop and do their work online, thus allow people to kind of move around as well. And the other kind of demographic that does do this is more people that are on the verge of retirement or retiring. They are now deciding they want to go to the countryside and kind of live out their days out there. Okay, now with guest and migrant workers. Now remember, with guest and migrant workers, these are people that do not stay in the country permanently. They're there on a temporary basis for economic reasons. Most people that are guest or migrant workers are often low-skilled workers. Think about more agriculture type jobs or seasonal type jobs. When we get to the Middle East ones, it's going to be more construction jobs, but these are temporary jobs that are not there 24/7 for them to work. And the reason we want these guest migrant workers is usually they're cheaper labor. In addition to that, they don't have to be permanent. Therefore, they're going to be much more beneficial for business owners to hire a guest or migrant worker than a full-time citizen of that country. Now, one of the main parts of the world that does have a lot of guest workers is Europe, and it's more of the western and northern countries of Europe are now pulling a lot of people from the eastern and southern part of Europe to be guest workers. Now, the idea that they have this European Union, which allows them to migrate back and forth a little bit more freely, they don't have to apply for all this kind of paperwork, they can just come and go. But usually they are brought in because they are paid a lot less than Western Europeaners, and that is going to help the businesses a little bit more. Now, with these low status or lower skilled jobs, that's what they're there for. Bus drivers, garbage collectors, seasonal jobs. They're not really migrating from the South and East Europe to North and West Europe for kind of these high end jobs, but definitely more low end jobs. Kind of again, the trend that you just want to remember is South and East to the North and West, South and East to the North and West. Um, Part of the issue with this is kind of attitudes Europeans have to the guest workers, whether they're from Northern Africa, like Algeria to France, or from Southern and Eastern Europe to Northern and Western Europe, is that usually immigrants there are blamed for crime and employment costs, welfare costs. In addition, that a lot of times they bring their culture, their religion, their language, their habits, and their food with them. And when they bring that with them, the original Europeans in those countries are now feeling threatened that their language is kind of being lost, or their food or their culture is being lost because of the influx of new culture. So again, you can use this culture argument as a pro and a con. You can use that as a pro and a con. Usually in human geo, though, you want to kind of use the idea of more culture being diverse, which is usually kind of a good thing. When you think more globalized culture, that's usually going to be used as kind of more of a negative. China was pretty simple. Keep in mind, China has a lot of people coming into China from nearby Oceania countries, and a lot of people heading out of China to try to take advantage of economic opportunities elsewhere. But the biggest migration going on in China is the one we already talked about, the internal migration, kind of going from the countryside to the major cities. Southwest Asia, also known as the Middle East, um, usually because they're growing so fast, because of oil, the cities there are growing extremely fast that they need a lot of guest workers for the construction jobs. They get a lot of these guest workers from South Asia and Southeast Asia to be guest workers in the Middle East. Part of the fear there is a lot of the guest workers are going to start political turmoil because they believe, hey, this is how we do it in our country. How come you guys in an Arab Muslim country are doing it this way? We don't want to follow your Islamic Arab kind of customs. We want to do our own thing. Whereas a lot of countries there have certain policies or things in place, whereas most people should follow their culture all the way through. The big part about guest workers or migrants in general is that they send a lot of remittances back home. This is money that they send back home to their family because they are making a decent amount at home or here in the new country, and they're sending their money back. This usually is sent back to lower developed countries. This is actually extremely important to the development of their economy, but also think about how it not cripples, but slows down the economy of the country that they're making the money in. So if you make all your money in country A, and you're not spending in A, you're sending it to country B. Country B is going to see the benefit of that. Country A, while you are paying taxes and putting a little bit of money back there into that economy, you're sending a lot of it back to your home country, which is definitely going to help the economy there. So think about current migration trends in the United States. A lot of people coming from Asia and a lot of people coming from Latin America. So look at the remittances as a percentage of a country's GDP, which is basically the amount of money a country makes. We take up a huge part of Mexico's GDP just by how much money we send back to Mexico. Look at how much money is being sent back to China. Look at how much money is being sent back to India. Not even just those ones, but look at Vietnam and the Philippines elsewhere. Guest workers, again, from India to Great Britain, they are also sending money back to their home country. Okay, so current U.S. migration. Keep in mind, up until about 1920, we had unabated access to the United States. Anybody could come to the United States as long as they were healthy. They could demonstrate basic skills. Then in 1921, we have the Quota Act, which starts allowing a limits being put on quotas all around the world for the United States. So it didn't matter who you were, where you came from, we had a certain quota, we put that number there. If we hit that amount, we let nobody else into the country that year. Then in 1924, we reconfigured this, where we now start putting in 2% of the population already in the country. So if we had a lot of Germans here or a lot of English people here, which we did, we could allow in 2% of that total amount to the country. This was mainly meant to keep it European. So now we first have a quota of we don't want immigrants here as much, so now we're going to put a limit. A couple years later, we revise it and make it more European. Yes, for migrants, we do like them coming in, but now we want to make sure they come from the places we want them to come from, the ones that look like us and that have the same kind of culture, ethnicity as us. That was the intention of the 1924 National Origins Act. I mean, it says it right there, National Origins. Code Act is obviously we put a number on it. National Origins is we alter it, and it's based on where you are kind of coming from. Currently, from 1965 to 78 to 90, it's more of a we put caps on certain countries. So we kind of shifted it from specific countries to more Eastern and Western Hemisphere, and now today we've put specific caps on specific countries around the world. As you can see, it was mostly Europe all the way through the 20s, 30s until World War II, and then since World War II, the influx has mostly been from Latin America and Asia to the United States. Now, we have preferences set in place of who can come into the United States when it comes to migration. Our first preference is family reunification. This is more of that chain migration. Keep in mind if you are a spouse, kid, or parent of a U.S. citizen already. So if you're a migrant here and you become a U.S. citizen, you can send for your entire family without this family reunification quota. Now, if you are a migrant here in the United States, but you are not yet a U.S. citizen, we first allow your spouses in. We first allow your kids in before we allow anybody else into the United States. Then we start looking for skilled workers, people that we think is going to benefit our economy here in the United States. That's going to be related to the brain drain. And the third one is it's a very small portion. Countries that we don't normally accept a lot of people from, we usually give them preference as kind of the final preference of who comes into the United States. Now again, the idea of the brain drain is that United States and Europe, we take a lot of the higher skilled jobs, scientists, doctors, lawyers from the rest of the world, and we bring them to our countries or our regions because we believe we need the best and the brightest, and we're going to give them preference into coming into our country over the lower skilled jobs because we believe these people are going to help our economy. Now again, with the brain drain, you have the idea of also remittances being sent back there. But usually this is going to hurt those countries. If we take India's best and brightest, if we take China's best and brightest, those are more starting to be developed countries, more stage 3, early stage 4 countries. We are going to slow their development because we are taking their best and their brightest. Now, some basic characteristics or generalizations of migrants in the United States. Keep in mind that it used to always be, not always males, but mostly males. 85% of Mexican migrants in the 80s was mostly males. Now in the 90s until present day, it's been more 50-50. So women are now becoming more likely to migrate internationally, especially to the United States, than males. And part of the reason is there was already a lot of the males here in the United States. Now women are starting to follow. Kind of keeping with this unauthorized characteristics, so who is likely to be an unauthorized migrant to the United States? Most do come from Mexico. Others do come from Latin America and elsewhere. The idea of distance decay, you have Mexico would be kind of here. You're going to have a lot of undocumented workers in New Mexico, Arizona, California, Texas. You get a little bit further away, you are going to have some, but you're going to have less. And notice the further you get away, you're going to have less and less. New York is going to be a big one because New York City is there. So they're going to have migrants from elsewhere. Remember, if you migrate internationally, you are probably going to end in a big city. Florida is not really going to be as related to Mexico. Their distance decay is going to be more related to Cuba. We're starting to have more and more children that are undocumented migrants to the United States. Most undocumented migrants in the United States have actually been here for 15 plus years. add in with people that have been here for 10 years, that's 50% of undocumented workers or undocumented migrants to the United States. They are a key factor to our total workforce. They make up 5% of our labor workforce, so that's 1 out of every 20 people in the United States. So they are definitely critical to the economy here, and we also know the benefit of them making money and sending remittances back home to kind of spur their economy. Okay, so now on to migration patterns or some general terms for migration. These are the ones you guys kind of acted out in class. Remember, chain migration is basically somebody migrating to a country, calling back, writing letters, letting them know that this is a good place to be. Therefore, now family members, other relatives, other people that are close to them are now going to migrate. When they migrate, they're not just going to the United States, they're not just going to England, they're going to go exactly where those people are. And the reason is for that is their familiarity with it. They can help them get a job, a place to stay. Usually this is family reunification or reunification. Because you have a lot of people coming from one country kind of to a very specific spot in another country, this is going to help create these ethnic neighborhood or ethnic enclaves. Again, that now provides more familiarity for those people that might migrate from China to Chinatown in San Francisco. Somebody in Chinatown in San Francisco might be calling back to China, letting them know, hey, you should come here and work. I can set you up with a job. They're not going to migrate to Chicago. There's no familiarity there. There's no family there. They're going to migrate to where their family is, which will be in Chinatown in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, wherever their friends are. One of the results of this or impacts of this is the creation of an ethnic neighborhood. So once they get there, over years, they've now created this ethnic neighborhood, which is going to have grocery stores, restaurants that are very, very similar to the type of cultural restaurants or cultural experiences that they would have in their hometown. Again, this is also usually as a result of chain migration because they're all densely populated in an area. They're going to change that cultural landscape and kind of make it theirs in the other country that they are in. Step migration. This is when people usually move up hierarchically of locations. What this really means is that they're going to go from a small town or the countryside to a small town to a little bit bigger town to a little bit bigger town, mainly for economic opportunities in that area. Each time that they take advantage of one of these better work opportunities is considered an intervening opportunity. So they're going to go, I'm not going to migrate from the countryside to a close town for a job. I'm going to go to that close town instead of actually going a little bit further away. The reason I'm going to do that is obviously that opportunity is there, it's much closer. Now when you move further away in the step migration and you go to a regional city or a larger metro area, it's usually again just for economic prosperity. There's a better job in that regional city. Now that I'm in that regional city working, the closer really big city is going to have another economic opportunity for me because obviously it's a bigger city. There's more economic opportunities there for me. Now, counter migration, this is also known as return migration. Just keep in mind that you're going to have these flows moving from one place back to that same place. Usually about 25% of people migrate back to the home country or back to their home region where they came from. Now, it doesn't have to be just the people who moved. It could now be their kids, relatives who are now moving back as well. The idea of channelized migration is a large migration which everybody knows about, everybody's kind of following, but it's not linked to family or ethnicity. I'm not migrating from A to B because of family. I'm not migrating from A to B because of ethnicity. I'm doing it for other reasons. There's a huge pattern going. There's a reason why I'm going from A to B. It could be familiarity. Okay, colonized places, former colonizers migrate from South Africa to England, England to South Africa. All right, it's not linked to their family or ethnicity. All right, but it's the familiarity. The other big one for channelized migration is people retiring in Arizona and Florida. All right, a lot of people migrate to Florida, but it's not because of families there. It's not because of ethnicity. There are many different reasons why they're migrating to Florida. It's always nicer. They have a lot of retirement homes. The taxes are friendlier down there for older people, so thus they're going to migrate to the south.